Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients. I'm your host, Amelia Fruby. I am the founder of Softer Sounds Podcast Studio. And here on this show, I am your fellow traveler and guide on this journey of creating successful, sustainable small businesses that don't rely on social media to make money. If you're new to this podcast, welcome. I am so glad that you're here. Please make sure you head to the show notes and grab the free Leaving Social Media Toolkit. That is a totally free resource that pairs with the first 4 episodes of the show and is a great introduction to what we do here. And if you're a longtime listener or just a return listener coming back for more, welcome back to the show. Today's episode is a really special one because I am talking to someone whose work I have admired from afar for a while. Honestly, first for her seemingly endless success, and now for her really honest sharing about what business is actually like these days, which I think is incredibly important to talk about because being self-employed isn't just this up and up and up ride toward ever more success. And I'm kind of thinking of this conversation as a follow-up to my episode from last season that I called Success is a Cycle, and Sometimes That Sucks, because sometimes we're in the sucky part of the cycle, and that is a part of a cycle. A cycle does not just go up and up and up. Business is not linear. Our lives are not linear. And stepping into this together and talking about it together, I think, is a way that we can feel more seen, heard, and supported in that process. So today we are digging into these cycles of success and maybe the not so successful feeling times with the wonderful Jenny Blake. And if you're not familiar with Jenny, let me tell you a little more about her. Jenny Blake is an award-winning author and podcaster who runs a media and licensing company. She loves helping people move from friction to flow through smarter systems powered by delightfully tiny teams. She's the author of Free Time, Lose the Busy Work, Love Your Business, and Pivot, The Only Move That Matters Is Your Next One. And she was the co-creator of Google's global drop-in coaching program, Career Guru. Jenny also hosts 2 podcasts with over 1 million combined downloads, and she's currently sharing her business journey on Substack through her publication, Rolling in Dough. Welcome, Jenny. I'm so thrilled to have you on Off the Grid.
Thank you so much, Amelia. I'm a longtime listener and mega fan. I remember binging your podcast episodes when I first discovered it while on my morning walks with Ryder. And your voice is just so soothing. And I love what you share. That I'm so honored I get to be in the guest seat today. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to have you. And I probably should have mentioned in that intro that you have been off social media much longer than I have. And I think initially that was one of the reasons I looked to you is yes, somebody doing business without social media and talking about how possible that is. So thank you for that as well. And I love that we're able to be in conversation today about social media and so much more.
Me too. I feel like I was early to things like Twitter and blogging. I started building an online platform in 2005. But there reached a point, maybe around 2012, where I started to feel like I'm just yelling into the void. I'm not even reading what anyone else says. I don't have the time or energy to respond to comments when I do post. So I'm now the jerk. And it wasn't giving me energy. It was draining it consistently, repeatedly. The levels of guilt and compare and despair and how much insecurity it fostered in me. I just effing hated it. And I kept hoping that it would be a trend that would come and go. And it's only grown. And the pressure has only grown in the decade that I've been off of it. And so even now, I have doubts oh my God, did I do the wrong thing? But in my heart of hearts, I know that I didn't. It's just so hard to stay true when everyone and everything seems to be pushing the direction to go on it, be in all the places. And so I really value what you're doing and sort of carrying the torch forward and showing what's possible and showing the trade-offs of it as well.
We all have our own journey with the marketing and business choices that we make. And I just love liberating us from the shoulds around all of those. I think some of our listeners will be familiar with your work and others will just be getting to know you. So I'm wondering if you could begin by just sharing with listeners a bit about the work that you've done in the businesses that you've built. I mean, in your bio, we get some great highlights of this, right? Co-creating Google's drop-in coaching program. You've written multiple books. You've had multiple podcasts. Could you give us a bit of kind of your career highlights over the past decade or more?
So to make a long story short, I left Google 13 years ago, and I really call myself an author. I've published 3 books. I did have 2 podcasts for 9 years, but I paused them in February because when my speaking part of the business and licensing took such a big hit in the pandemic, I lost 80% of my income in the first 2 weeks of lockdown. It never really returned. I kept thinking that every next year it was all going to come back again in my delulu fantasies. And so Life After College was my first book that got me to leave Google because I was one of those early blog to book people where, because I had started a blog so early in 2007, I built a lot of community and momentum. And I think when I got the book deal for that with Running Press in 2010, I think I had 500 newsletter subscribers. But at that time, most people didn't have a newsletter or a blog. And so I was able to parlay that first book into launching out of corporate. I gave myself 6 months. Genuinely did not see myself as an entrepreneur, did not think I was capable, but I knew I would regret not trying. Fast forward 2 years later, I was sick of talking about life after college. I was now 29, about to hit my Saturn return, for those who are inclined astrologically or numerologically. And I was just over it. I had been blogging about life after college for a long time, and I couldn't do it anymore. And I didn't want to be one of these like one-hit wonders that's still promoting life after college when I'm 50 or 60 years old. And so that was my first real crisis because I was 2 years into self-employment and now there was not a paycheck to fund the question of what's next. So in navigating and then solving that, that's where Pivot came from. And by design, and also by, luck and lots of other things, Pivot became the cash cow. Like I got a book deal with Penguin Random House. Portfolio specifically was the division. It came in on my birthday in 2014. No one was talking about career pivots at that time. While writing the book, I very purposefully designed scalable revenue streams so that when it launched, I wouldn't be the bottleneck the way I was with Life After College, doing individual one-on-one coaching and speaking. I was super intentional that okay, the business was going to be scalable, even if I didn't want to grow the company size, that the revenue streams would be. And it also really hit with corporate. So yes, at that time when Pivot came out in 2016, it sold really well. The advance was for $150,000 instead of $15,000 was Life After College. All the corporate work, Pivot probably earned me $1 million over the next 8 years, maybe a little less. And it sold really well. It sold 60,000 copies, which in book universe is very rare to sell even 3,000. So it just hit. And the economy was growing. We should also say, because now in the after times, post-pandemic, I'm able to look back at that era and say, oh, cool, look how lucky I got because I basically launched my business into what was going to be a decade of really strong economic I won't even call it headwinds. It's like tailwinds. Like it just pushed my business up and along until all those companies started really slashing budgets and interest rates rose. And that affects who hires me to do things like speaking, which is quite expensive if a company is trying to be more austere.
So Pivot was a great success by all accounts, which we love. How did free time come into play? I think I've heard you say that after doing all of that corporate work, you knew you loved the tiny teams and small business owners and you wanted to return to them. But I'd love to hear you speak a little bit to that now. Why was free time your next step?
Yeah, well, I had launched a private community in 2015. Actually, in 2014, it was called Brilliance Barter. And then I shifted the name, called it Momentum. And I had this community for 9 years. And when the pandemic hit in 2020, I must have had it at that point 7 or 8 years. All my corporate clients canceled their contracts. Every single last one, not just for that month, not just for that year, but for 2 years into the future. what was left were these beautiful, brilliant, small, tiny heart-based business owners, of which I include myself. And I think for you too, Amelia, a lot of your listeners. And that's where my heart was. And I think that with the pandemic and so many terrible things happening, and personally, professionally, for me and so many others, we all have our losses from that time. I felt like I don't want to write what my publisher would have wanted from me and my literary agent was Pivot 2.0. I should just write Pivot for Managers, or something, whatever the next book. I felt like I had said it all. But what I hadn't put out there was this love of small business and online business that I had been teaching and guiding and leading for the last 5 years, but behind a paywall, behind the scenes, because it was in the community, Momentum community. And so I felt it was worth taking a risk to not worry if I offended my corporate clients or would somehow impede the ability for them to hire me in the future, to go where my heart was. And that's really the only way I can write a book, is to write what's on my heart. I cannot phone it in. Even with AI being around, that's not my style. I had so much I felt I could say and share that were around systems to set your time free, and things like optimizing for revenue, joy, and ease. My guiding question in my own business for the last decade had been, how can we earn twice as much in half the time with joy and ease while serving the highest good? And these were themes that I just didn't see out there as much as I felt they could be. Even online business, it's not just about the money. It's not just trying to earn the elusive. At one time, it was 6 figures. Now that's not good enough. It's 7. It's 8. Now you're a $1 billion creator. It's never effing ending. And I just wanted to write the manifesto, but also the very practical, nitty-gritty guide to the systems that can actually set your life free and give you your life back, and not be in the rat race, whether corporate or online business, the way that it was currently being taught.
I mean, I love this book. It came out, must have been a year or 2 years into my self-employed journey and launching Softer Sounds. And it really felt like an affirmation of many of the things that I wasn't seeing affirmed in business books, which is that you can start a business because you want work to look a certain way for you and you want it to feel a certain way for you. And that's a great reason to be self-employed. It doesn't have to be because you've found a hole in the market or you've built a tech tool that's scalable or anything else. You can really ground it in like kind of your needs and desires around ways of working. And then also, of course, tend to the like communities and clients and customers and how you serve them and what you offer. But those can be aligned and they don't have to be in conflict, which I feel like is so much of how I had seen business be talked about, especially through the disparagement of lifestyle business, which we see a lot in corporate and startup and tech cultures.
Right. And I had done a survey of the landscape. There were 15 business books on kind of small business systems, and every single one was written by a man. And I felt like they all had used these war metaphors, really aggressive language. They assumed that the goal of the business was to grow as big as possible, as fast as possible. And none of them addressed what happens on the home front, the systems for your personal life or your wellness. And that was the other thing that really actually made me angry. It's just that they were imagining there's a fairy living at home because they're celebrating their success. And a lot of them were, middle-aged white men with a wife and kids at home, but they don't feel the need to address any systems that would help ease things on the home front because there's somebody there doing them all. And I just felt like I kind of had to figure it out in a different way as a business owner and a breadwinner, and yet from a different perspective. And so I felt like as well, we could have more fun talking about business, talking about systems. It didn't have to be so boring or aggressive. And really, at the end of the day, I wanted to write the book that a business owner like you could give to your team and just say, here, this is how we work, and kind of save you the time and trouble to teach people how to think in a systematic way without being so boring that no one on the team will read it. that was my other hope.
Yeah, no, I think the book is definitely fun to read. And I really appreciate the emphasis you just placed there, because so many business books are written by middle-aged white men. And of course, there's nothing wrong with being a middle-aged white man, but it's a very specific point of view that almost everyone I speak to and work with cannot actually relate to. And our lives don't look that way. And I think often what brings so many of us being like women and non-binary folks into self-employment is that we have caretaking responsibilities. We have different energetic capacities, or we have even chronic illnesses or other experiences that just kind of take us out of standard employment for an employer. And so when we either choose or have to choose self-employment, there are just so few resources for us that actually speak to our lived experiences.
And I feel like what you mentioned about the energy capacity is so crucial as well. Most things I end up writing about are just things I've struggled with and often been very hard on myself for at first. I just don't have the energy available that other people seem to have when it comes to work. Like I can't and no longer want to work even 8 hours a day, I think is way too much. And I did that in corporate and I was sick the whole time I was in corporate, whether it was hyperthyroidism, Graves' disease, acne, asthma. I was sick. My body was not happy. In my own business, then, I made it a priority to work different hours. Like, who says 9 to 5, Monday through Friday makes sense? A factory says that because it's good for the owner of the factory. It's not good for the wellness of the people in it. Now, for your audience, like this is nothing new. We all know we've been having this conversation for a decade. But my question was, okay, how? And do we necessarily have to be, quote, less successful to work a different way? I don't necessarily think so either. I don't want to assume that if I put in less time to my business, I'll earn less money. Maybe, but maybe not. What are the ways that I could optimize for both? And I will tell you that sometimes I still get down on myself, like, especially when I'm having financial challenges, trying to meet my new set of responsibilities these last few years. I'll go, maybe if I was willing to work harder, maybe I'm being lazy. So what did I do? In April, I doubled down. I ran around trying to do all the client work, speaking, individual clients, VIP days, Voxer coaching. I threw all the spaghetti at the wall. And at the end of the 2 months, where did I end up? In the ER. So once again, I knew that way of working doesn't work for me. I tried it again anyway, almost out of desperation. Like, well, is this really the answer? And I've been wrong all along? No, I ended up in the ER. So I spent the rest of the summer focusing on health as my number one and purposefully not earning. And once again, I just have to build it a different way. And I think about it every day that my energetic capacity is just different than what other people have. And I make myself miserable when I try to compare or I try to hold myself to a time standard that my body really doesn't like. That's all I can say. I get punished immediately. I say the universe has me on a short leash. It just won't allow me to work that way. I get sick and quick.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us, especially because like that last piece, it's like the pressure is both internal and external, and it's very real. Like you have a mortgage to pay, you have a partner to take care of, you have a dog to take care of. Like it's not imagined. Some pressure is internal and we put it on ourselves, but other pressure is very materially present in our lives. And I think that especially in the online business world, that can get like morphed or discarded or not recognized as a motivating factor for why we make so many decisions. And I also think it's really easy to be hard on ourselves when we make those choices and we get sick or we have to go to the ER or, I experience chronic migraines. And if I overwork, it's a huge trigger for them. Too much screen time, it really triggers my migraines. But simultaneously, when that happens, I tend to get really hard on myself and be like, oh, you did it again, Amelia. Like, why do you keep doing this? But I'm really trying to learn to be gentler with myself and kinder to myself and recognize that like some of it is my own tendency toward overwork. I have built a decade-long habit of working a lot, and that is something I can work on. But some of it is very real pressure from outside sources to work and try to earn and try to prove my worth by working to try to earn. But the other piece of it I appreciate, or I'm curious about what you shared is like, okay, you ended up in the ER. Did it make the amount of money you like wanted to make in the process, or did it not even do that for you either?
Oh, that time I earned a lot of money and it all went to taxes. I got a huge tax bill. I was expecting a refund and instead I ended up owing like $40,000 that was a kind of a cascade from previous years, even including taking the big bets on free time. And then it turned out the accounting team messed up. So later in the summer, I owed another $8,200. And then I hired an outside accountant to audit their work because I no longer trusted it. And I owed another $7,500. So this has been a year of like intense tax pain that every time I earn. So I haven't even parsed the lessons of this precisely. So I earned exactly what I needed to pay the bill at that time, but no more. So it didn't get me ahead. And I find it very fascinating when I can get through the pain. I was also in very intense neck and shoulder pain that ended up paralyzing half my face and Bell's palsy. That's what took me to the ER. But I find it so fascinating to listen to my body's messages. And so, for example, sitting, I call it the gremlin in my lower back. I developed a gremlin in my lower back the last maybe 6 months of podcasting. And for the last year of podcasting, I had been losing my voice because I got COVID in early 2023. I had such intense asthma, I couldn't sleep at night. I would wake up multiple times a night. So I started taking a steroid inhaler. But the cost of that, the asthma went away, but I started losing my voice. So by the time I paused my podcasts, which was not an easy choice, my lower back was starting to really hurt and my voice was going. And it's just, okay, like my body is not happy sitting all day. I was producing 14 episodes a month and happily, I thought it was my raison d'etre. Like I really loved it. It was one of my favorite things I've ever done in my business. But my body just wasn't having it. And losing my voice was so in line with the podcast activity that I couldn't ignore it. And that's what preceded even the spring sprint and then trip to the ER. So I feel like I'm doing my best to listen, but it's also a lot of touch and go, kind of like communicating with any animal. It's hard to know what's wrong when they're hurting. Like you can see that they're down, but they can't speak English. So, okay, it is a little bit of trial and error, but I do trust the messages. I do trust that they are redirecting me somehow.
Yeah. And I just think this is so important and something that I've been appreciating about what you've been writing lately about both listening to your body, but also what I see in it is this practice of like cultivating your intuition. And so I want to read something you wrote and shared today as we're recording this in a letter on your Substack. It was called Bless You. And I just want to share this with listeners and maybe ask how you're thinking about it in these moments. But here's what you wrote. You said, "I'm between a very hard rock and a very hard place," I typed into my remarkable journey during the flight. "But these are the problems I've chosen, and I will keep fighting to find a way through. I don't know what else to do." Like so many Sinatra-inspired creatives before me, I have now adopted the refrain that I previously thought I was immune to. Should I stay or should I go? The well-worn question rattles regularly in my mind, even as my heart repeatedly replies, "No, please don't make me." Am I being stubborn by insisting I stay, or is it the responsible thing to go? This has also been one of the central questions of Doe, your Substack, since losing the 6-figure corporate contract that helped me clear the mortgage every year. So lately, I'm always looking for new signs, signier signs, to break the tie. Can you tell us a little bit about this like sign searching process and this question of like, should I stay or should I go? How's it living with you right now?
Well, first, what an honor to have you read this excerpt. I'm always nervous when I post that it's not good enough. And hearing it in your voice, like, can you just narrate all the Rolling in Dough posts? If I ever can't do the audiobook, I know who I'm calling. Thank you for reading that. And it's really cool to hear what stands out to you. This excerpt that you read, just in case it wasn't clear for listeners, is should I stay or should I go? New York City. I've also been here 13 years. And I love it. Every day I'm delighted. And yes, there are moments that are scary or weird or strange or gross at the same time, but I love it so much. And I'm really like hanging on by my fingernails to stay. And it's so hard to know, is that the responsible thing or am I being stubborn now? Or entitled, fill in other adjective of your choice. Because I have a feeling that a lot of readers would just say, oh, poor you. You're living in one of the most expensive cities on the planet and you're complaining about money. Like, get up and go, girl. Like, pack your things, move to somewhere else, anywhere in the world, and shut the hell up. Like, stop complaining. And all I can say to that is it's like my soul city. It's like being with a soulmate. It's not necessarily easy, but there's so much learning and growth and inspiration. And for what I do as a writer, thinker, observer, I just love the chaos. Every day I am exposed to people and humanity and stories and serendipities that I just cannot imagine. I'm sure I will live somewhere else someday. But right now, I'm still trying to stay. And it's the same for my business. They're very parallel. Like, I'm fighting to stay self-employed, even though everyone I love, who knows and loves me, says, have you thought about getting a job? And, well, maybe you should look at a job. And now they're even starting to suggest what jobs I should look for. Like, oh, could you teach at Columbia? Or the other day I looked, is Peloton hiring? Because I love Peloton. It's like they're all saying it. Go get a job. So do I? Or is there something just around the corner that I will be grateful that I hung on for, including all the values that you and I spoke about that are in free time? Of like working in the way that I know I need to work. I can't imagine having to just do butt and seat time again if I can help it. But something's clearly not working. So this looking for signs and signier signs, one of my mentors, Penny Pierce, she says intuition works on a need-to-know basis and that you'll get a download or your intuition will speak up in the moment it's needed and not a moment sooner. So sometimes I just have fun looking for these signs of like, which way are the tea leaves falling today or this week? Are they falling in the direction of magic and serendipity and joy where I'm delighted to be here? Or are they falling in the other direction? Even if signs are sort of a placebo effect where I notice because I want to see them, that's still what my intuition wants me to notice and pay attention to. And they still fill my cup. So I guess it's like a fun game that I play in the absence of any other concrete information and in a time of such confusion is what am I noticing? And no matter how small they are, what might they mean? What meaning could I make from these things?
What I'm hearing you say is just like this commitment to paying attention. And like that is how you connect to your intuition. And at the same time, like the sense making is not quite arriving yet. Like you're trying, you're paying attention, you're trying to make sense, but almost like the more you grasp for it, it's just not clear. And that's a very real and very hard place to be.
And that's been going on for years. That's what I find so strange about this time of my life, that I've had liminal years before. I mean, one preceded pivot. And then I wrote a book about how to navigate change and what's next. Cool. But has nothing to do with what's going on right now somehow. And I've tried experiments. I've tried launching various programs in my business or relaunching things that already exist. And what has been so interesting to me over the last, I would say 2 years, is that every program I've tried to launch has filled to a third or a fourth of the capacity. Meaning it got me by, just like the money that paid that tax bill. Got me by, but no more. Nothing was a home run. It was like singles, and that was it. And so I was putting all this effort, really a disproportionate amount of effort, in trying to go backward, trying to relaunch things or invent new programs or collaborate with people. But those weren't faring any better. So I have been trying. It's not a lack of trying in terms of experimentation. The one thing that is working best, that feels so aligned the way that previous big parts of my body of work have, is rolling in dough. And the funny thing about it is, I mean, it's a play on words. So listeners, if you haven't seen it, it's spelled DOH with a facepalm emoji in the middle. I know Amelia loves emojis too.
I do.
That has been so refreshing. It reinvigorated a love of writing that I never really had in this way when I was writing more business advice stuff. I've completely dropped the desire to be an expert. I don't want to sit there, and I feel allergic to expertise at the moment. And Tara McMullen has been great about this too. Like, she has a sub-column in her Substack called "This Is Not Advice." She's been a great pioneer on that front of really declaring, like, I'm not here to give advice. And I feel so allergic to that as well with the times that we're in or the times that I'm going through. It feels so much better to just lean into the creativity and say, this is the other side of business, the hard parts that people are less willing to talk about because probably rightfully they don't want it to become a self-fulfilling prophecy driving all future business away. I just had lost so much business that I stopped caring. I just felt like this is what's not being said. And so this project is working the best energetically. It's just not clear yet if there's any financial path. And of course, I'm trying not to put the pressure on it to be anything. Like, I always joke that if you put financial pressure on a business area or creative project too early, it's like trying to demand that a child win a beauty pageant to support the family. Like, it's just not right.
Yeah, it is kind of impossible in that way. Hello, my lovely listener. Amelia here, interrupting this amazing conversation because if you're enjoying this episode, the one you're listening to right now, I think you would really love the Off the Grid Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a paid podcast, newsletter, and asynchronous community space for friends and fans of Off the Grid, hosted on Substack. It's where I share my monthly biz forecasts, bonus episodes about my hot takes, personal feelings, deepest, darkest, brightest, lightest ideas about online business, and more. I also send out a monthly link roundup called The Click Through, where I gather everything that I have been reading, watching, and intrigued by with regards to internet culture, social media happenings, and online business at large. That's also where I have been chronicling the many, many, many announcements I see lately of people taking breaks from social media or exiting platforms entirely. And all of the posts in the Clubhouse have community comment threads where you can ask me questions, share your experiences, and chat with other Off the Grid listeners. It only costs $5 per month or $50 per year to join the fun, and I truly hope that you will head to the show notes and check it out. I look forward to seeing you on Substack, but for now, let's dive back into this conversation. I would love to maybe talk a little more about Substack itself, because I know that also kind of as you were pausing your podcast, you like moved everything over to Substack, and Rolling in Dough lives there as well. And I'm just curious, like, how you use the platform, what's your experience of it? And then, you know, in my opinion, the promises of Substack at this point are like discoverability through their platform, and then also like easy monetization, and like you'll make money from things you used to do for free. And so I'm also curious, like, is that working for you? Are you growing and making money? Like, how does Substack work in your world?
Well, let's start with that question and working backward. I know you've had Antoinette on a couple times, and she's been on my shows as well. I love the way she describes how good the financial reciprocity feels. There is such psychological safety in the ability to put a paywall into a post and know that it's not like my most personal stories or client-related stories are behind a paywall. That was one of the most appealing things, that it's not just a regular newsletter. It really allows me to dig deeper and offer it to the people who really want that part of my story without having it be Google searchable or public. And then the reciprocity, it's the first time for me in 18 years of writing and publishing online that, well, now it's almost 20 years, that the writing itself has a financial return where people can pay to subscribe. And I have a lot of fun trying to craft cliffhangers before the paywall. And then people will upgrade to paid and they're like, oh, you got me. Your cliffhangers are too good. And that feels so rewarding. It feels like it's a mini meritocracy within my own universe that if I write well or share interesting things, people will pay to support it, rather than the writing always being a means to an end, like somehow has to be marketing for something else. I also really love the social element of the sense that if I mention you, Amelia, I can tag you and you'll get a notification that I've mentioned you. So it feels like back to early blogging days where we're not all so siloed. I've connected with authors I really admire. I've connected with people who I never thought would give me the time of day. Like, I think I replied to Elizabeth Gilbert and she liked my comment. It's like, cool, she knows I exist. And I also really like that in terms of my newsletters for Pivot and Free Time, they're published now in a public archive because I had been doing newsletters for 15 years and I just reached a point where I felt like I'm emailing into the void. I'm not reading newsletters anymore. Who's reading these? And they're just disappearing in people's inboxes. So I like that at least now there's a public record of what I send out that I can reference, I can link to, other people can search and find. The content isn't just going to die in people's inboxes, basically. So those are all things that after a couple months of rolling in dough, I decided to move my whole platform over because I really like those elements. I do get overwhelmed by some of the social situations on Substack. Like, it is a much better user experience to read all the Substacks you subscribe to in their app because it's like an inbox. And I'm on a break right now, but for a while with my morning coffee, I would open my Substack app and browse really thoughtful, in-depth writing and sharing. It was so different than being in my email inbox and just seeing a bunch of marketing drivel. And then every now and then have to like find the needle in the haystack that was the personal essay. Now, because I curate who I subscribe to, which is over 500 Substacks.
Whoa. That's great. I love that.
It's like my own personal newspaper. The writing, the quality, the thinking, it's so deep. And it's why I never resonated on social media because a lot of it felt shallow and performative. But Substack, because it's mostly right now focused on the writing, feels deep. But it can get overwhelming thinking like, oh, do I need to be on notes? How often do I post? When do I post? I'm not doing any of that. And I do think that there were many promises about how it could support us all financially. And I think that my experience of that so far is it's another long tail. There's going to be a few people who are held up as the examples who can actually earn a living. And for the rest of us, it's like allowance money compared to other parts of the business. Not a reason not to do it. I think all those other benefits for me still outweigh it. But prepare to be disappointed if you think you're going to be the one making six figures right away.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of love that way of thinking, though, of like, what's my allowance money in the business? I've been joking with some friends behind the scenes lately that like in August, I think, maybe September, sometime this fall, Softer Sounds passed our 100K revenue mark for the year. And I was like, cool, that's fine. But I put out this little digital tarot zine and it made $300. And I was like, $300? I'm so thrilled because it's my allowance money. And it's such a different energy when I approach it that way, right? Like if I did something in the context of my business that only made $300 in quotation marks, I would be like devastated. But when I just did this like fun random side thing for myself and it made $300 whole, I was thrilled. And sometimes that framing I find really helpful, or that like shift of mindset around money in relationship to different projects, I think can be really nice in how I set my expectations.
I love that. And it's like $300 can buy you an outfit or 5. It can take you out to a nice dinner or 3. It could get you a spa day with a loved one. Like there's cool things that $300 can fund. And then it gives you hope. You're like, oh, well, there's 300. There could be more. And then, I don't know, a lot of the annual renewals for Rolling in Dough came up in the summer. And they definitely cleared me 1 month of the mortgage. Like they kind of got me over a threshold I needed to cross. And it's like, I don't know, it came in the perfect timing. And I agree. It's also still better than earning 0. Like if I was writing on a different platform, it'd be 0. So sometimes people complain about Substack taking 10% of paid subscriber income. But for me, that's just money I wouldn't have had the courage to charge for it before, because I was a Substack curmudgeon when they first launched. I thought, come on, we've been publishing for 10 years already, newsletters. Like, what are you doing that's not what the rest of us has been already doing for a decade? But it was when they added the social features, then I finally came around. And there's a lot that sometimes I think people criticize Substack for. But what I appreciate is that they're trying to build a culture of paying writers for their work. I can get with that. I believe in that. Even though, yes, it's a venture-backed tech startup co-founded by 3 men. Again, at least they are trying to create this culture for writers. And I do think that I'm paying more writers for their work. I feel good when I subscribe and support people, and I see people doing the same for me. And that wasn't happening before. So I do feel grateful for that.
I mean, I'm definitely someone who is critical and has been critical of Substack. And also, I have a Substack newsletter for a specific aspect of my business now. And I think there's often a both and with platforms. And I think that there is no purely ethical tech tool in this stage of VC funded tech under late stage capitalism. Like anything I'm using is going to be problematic and perhaps even like work against my deeper needs and desires at some point. Like I think that's just the state of big tech and of tech startups at large, if I'm being honest and maybe a little pessimistic. So I think we're all just negotiating. Which platforms do we choose? What works for us? And how do we use them? And I think there's all that space, like you were sharing before, between this expectation of like, is this my sort of quote unquote allowance money? Or am I desiring this to make me a full-time income? If I want it to, do I understand what that will take? And do I understand how big the gap is between the allowance money and the full-time income and what it will take to bridge that divide? And like, and for me, like, am I willing to do that? And I think what I've seen is that like the folks who are able to bridge that with more ease are typically people who have been sharing their writing on the internet for a decade or more as writers. Like people know them for their writing and now they're like, cool, I can pay you for your writing. The rest of us, I think we have to build that time. And if they know us as marketers, it's a huge shift to get them to know us as writers. And there's just a lot happening in what seems to be that simple, like monetize your newsletter dream that a lot of us have. Like there's way more at stake and underneath that.
And it's also, I think, interesting to consider too. Like I knew with podcasting when I went all in trying to see if I could get the podcast to provide the main revenue for the business, I knew that I was creating a job for myself. But it was a job that I wanted to try. Because when I say creating a job, with something like my corporate licensing pivot, IP to corporate, that could be a 6-figure check for 0 hours of work. Literally. The best like time to revenue ratio for revenue in my business. Okay, whereas podcasting, if I was doing 14 a month, trying to get my download numbers up so that it could be the main thing and I could have advertisers and so on, that was like all day, every day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I was preparing, I was interviewing, I was being interviewed, even when I hired a full service production team who were amazing. Same thing with writing. Like now I have these 3 newsletters and I'm trying to remind myself, this is a job and it has to be a job that you want. Like even when, let's say for Rolling in Dough, I don't know how many I've comped versus how many are paying, but let's say there's 100 paying subscribers. Dough is expensive. Don't ask me why. I just felt like charging $11 a month or $108 a year. I kind of made it expensive on purpose because I didn't want anyone to read some of my like very deepest secretive stuff. But I feel so responsible. Like it doesn't matter. So let's say $11 a month times 100 readers is $1,000 a month. It doesn't matter that a keynote could get me 10, 15, or 20,000 in an hour. I don't care. These people are paying a lot of money, like as much as almost a Netflix subscription. So what am I giving? How am I showing up? Am I meeting my deadlines of Wednesday and Saturday at 11:11? How about the other newsletters? Like every time someone pays $5, they are trusting me to deliver. And it's not easy to deliver at that cadence. For me now, it's like almost a newsletter a day. It's a job. And I think that it sounds very romantic. Let's earn a living from our writing. And I try to remind myself the realities of the job that entails. And there may come a day where I remove paid subscriptions for pivot or free time. Probably not Rolling in Dough, but just to relieve myself of the pressure of that type of job.
I think this is a really important reminder and something that I think I've spoken about inside of the Off the Grid Clubhouse, maybe not here so much on the public podcast, that I very much see myself like as a self-employed person. I made a job for myself that I enjoy. Like being a podcast producer is a job. That is the job I have at Softer Sounds. And I do every single aspect of making podcasts for other people. I guide them through strategy. I listen to their episodes. I edit them. I write their show notes. I finalize things. I make graphics. I schedule and post them. Like it's not necessarily glamorous, and it's not like I'm hanging out over here just doing my like quote unquote soul work every day. Like I have a service-based job for other people, and I work like at least typically 30 hours a week. Like it is a job. And I think that I love to talk about the aspects of my work that feel like a calling or the things that I love doing. And I am working on a shift next year toward being more of a podcaster myself and perhaps less of a producer for other people, and shifting my income to make that possible, or like my energy and my income to make that possible. But still, I will have a job as a podcast producer. And I think that I appreciate what you're saying about like there's this big gap between what we imagine being a writer is and what it actually is, like what writing for a paying audience actually entails. And I think that's true with just almost every version of self-employment. Like there's such a gap between what we imagine being a, media and licensing company that works with six-figure corporate contracts, what we think that is, and then what the work actually is, or, being a podcast producer, what we think that'll be like, what it's actually like. Any of these roles that we're kind of imagining or trying to step into or trying to step out of, there's just this realization that these are jobs. And even when you're self-employed, many versions of self-employment are just about creating a job for yourself. And I kind of think that the idea of having a business where you don't really have to work, where you do get, do no work for those six figures. Like, I don't mean this in a critical way of anything you're sharing, but somewhere in there is an exploitation of someone else, like in a corporate setting. I think that that's happening on some level, and that I'm wary of it. And maybe I just can't imagine it for myself, and that's my own failing. But I have so many question marks around if it's really real in a sustainable way.
Well, I think that's the key too, because I don't know about the exploitation. I'm trying to think it through with, let's say, pivot licensing, but certainly luck. The clients that came to me, it was kind of lucky, or I already had those relationships. But when I needed a third client, they came in cold off the website. I didn't know them. It was a famous retailer, but the contract fell apart when the pandemic hit, and I was never able to land another client. I was never able to land another licensing client. So my job should have become B2B outbound sales. Like my job, if I wanted that next six-figure licensing check, then the job was going to be reaching out to all kinds of companies. It had never worked for me to hire a salesperson to do it. They just had never had success. Maybe I wouldn't have either. But it was like, it was not falling into my lap. Therefore, the job would have become having a bunch of sales calls all day and trying to talk about their HR needs. And like, I just couldn't imagine it. I hit a wall. My creative self said, no, I don't want that job. And so I pivoted and worked on free time and worked on creating the new universe. That is where my comfort zone. And I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm just saying for better and for worse. I refused to do the job that would have gotten me the next licensing client. Instead, I went back to my comfort zone and my joy zone of creating something new, and especially for an audience that I really cared about. And possibly the same thing with my podcast. Like my job should have become growth marketing or paid advertising, figuring that out. And I didn't want that job. Even for me, like one-on-one coaching could be a job. I went through coach training in 2008. I have the Google background. But when I'm confused, my energy is not aligned to be coaching, even though I could. And I really enjoy doing my Voxer coaching, which is asynchronous. I've done it 2 summers in a row. But holding space for somebody for an hour, I don't feel I'm currently up to that job. So even though I could do it to make the money and pay the bills, I actually don't feel it's in service of potential clients that I take them on. A one-off strategy session, that's fine. But where they're my client, the way I would want to show up for them on a recurring weekly and monthly basis, I don't have that energetic capacity right now. So it's a job that I'm basically refusing to take. Again, stubbornness. But I just think it's so interesting. It's like there are things that we could do, maybe things that we should do, maybe things that might be smart to do. And yet for me, it's trying to stay aligned with the jobs I'm choosing. And when they're no longer aligned, I personally have a really hard time faking it or phoning it in. Just, again, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I feel that. As within human design, I'm a sacral generator. And it was a huge unlock for me when I learned, like, oh, you have endless energy for the things you actually want to do. And it is physically harmful to you to do things you don't want to do. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, maybe because I'm a generator too, and that sounds spot on. And that's why I'm also being so stubborn in my waiting for the gut yes. Because I'm like, I know what happens when I try to fake it. It's just not even going to work anyway. Like the April sprint.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for just meeting me today with like all of your honesty. It has quickly become the quality I feel like I most admire about you from afar, at least. And I'm really, really grateful for it. I feel like we're living in this era of a lot of business leaders a little bit gaslighting us into believing that like everything's just chill and the same and like nothing really shifted through the pandemic. And I'm so not here for that. And I really appreciate that you're not doing that and you're just being open and honest and sharing from the middle of it and not waiting until you figure out the next big thing or until you have the next solution for us. You're really bringing us into this space of waiting for that yes to come from your gut. And that's a hard place to be. And I'm really grateful that you're allowing us into that.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Thank you for creating this container to have conversations like this. And I've been so reassured by how you show up, what you share, the guests that you've had, what you're creating here, I think is so special. And thank you for your kind words. I joke that dough, they say right from the scar and not the wound. And I'm like, sorry, dough is the wound. That's what it is. And if you don't like it, go read something else. I have no scarry lessons to share at this point. But if you want to know what the wound is like, come on in. So thank you. And I hope that anybody listening, you just know that you're not alone if it's been a really tough time and that you also haven't figured it out yet. We are definitely in that boat together.
Absolutely. Thank you, listeners, for joining us with this. I will link to Jenny's mini Substacks in the show notes, as well as her website, so you can connect with her work. I will link to the Free Time book if you want to get your own copy of it. And I think that's it for today's episode. So until next time, we'll see you off the grid. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really